Ethan Harris, a busy day for him at Bank of America Merrill Lynch. Ethan, good noon to you.
Yes, thank you.
It's just a very, very difficult report. Was there anything positive in this jobs report today?
Well, the good news is that it comes off of 3 good months, so it is just 1 month of data. The other thing you saw in the report was you did see the work week was a little better than expected. But this is a pretty poor report, and certainly in the middle of an economic recovery, we shouldn't be getting 54,000 payroll gains.
What portion of this is cyclical ebb and flow, and what portion of this is structural, the angst of the nation?
I think a lot of this has to do with the fragility of the recovery, that it doesn't really take much of a shock to slow things down. We have a lot of wounded sectors in the U.S. economy, and so it seems that every time we get a bit of bad news, like a run-up in oil prices, events in Japan, the economy kind of overreacts. People pull back and become very cautious. And I think that's a big factor in why the economy seems to have slowed so much in the last month.
Let's look at the structural angst. Here it is, dreaded first chart, median duration. That's what I go to. Michael McKee goes to weekly hours worked. Median duration says QE3. It's just still sustained. It went to 22 weeks. Again, you can see that little move up in the right-hand corner. Ethan Harris, are we closer to QE3 with today's report?
Well, we're a step closer, but QE3 is still a long way off. Remember, by the time the Fed did QE2 last year, you'd had many months of job numbers like this one. I don't see the Fed doing QE3 unless this soft patch extends into the second half of the year. So I don't think we should be counting on the Fed to come to the rescue very quickly here.
Victor, wander over here. I know you're going to the beach this weekend, Victor. I want to use your hard. 1939, this is a Wizard of Oz chart. I will make this a long-term view, but I brought it up today. Manufacturing in the United States. Manufacturing. And here we are, the manufacturing renaissance across the 20th century. Ethan, it drops like a cliff in the year 2000-ish, and we've had a little itty-bitty renaissance here. How genuine is this renaissance in manufacturing?
Well, I mean, we're getting some recovery, and certainly the manufacturing sector is very tied into the global economy, and so that part of the recovery is real. But you know, the manufacturing sector, like the whole U.S. economy, is still being held back by all the headwinds, the crippled sectors like housing, banking, and so on. So it's not a very robust recovery.
Let's look at construction. Nobody talks about that. Let's have Ethan talk about it. Construction employment is back to 1996. Is that just about the housing market, or does that say more, Ethan, about investment in America?
Well, it's both. It's the residential and the non-residential sector. Corporations don't want to make big commitments to long-term projects. There's a lot of spare capacity in the office space. And then obviously we have extremely depressed residential construction. The only area where you really see any strength actually is home improvement. That's actually become the most important part of the housing market. That tells you how bad the construction industry is doing.
Yeah, I'm a threat to society with a hammer in my hand, Ethan. Let's look at the note here. Not much of a makeup quarter. Ethan Harris and his team at Merrill Lynch. We expect a strong makeup quarter in the second half, but the bigger story is weak fundamentals. We expect growth to rebound only to 3% in Q3 and Q4. I'm going to call that, Ethan, a blended nominal GDP well under 5%. Where do we need to get top-line GDP?
Well, the reason we're disappointed in this is you have a 2% first half, and normally if it's just all temporary stuff, you'd think you get 4 or 5 kind of GDP growth in the second half as you kind of make up for the bad quarters. But we're just going back to the same weak trend we started with. 3% growth is okay. If we can stay at 3 and keep working away at healing the wounds in the economy, eventually we'll get to a better place where we have a healthy, robust economy. But it's a very slow process, and certainly we can't heal if we stay at the 2% type numbers we're looking at now. That tells us that there's no healing going on.
Ethan Harris with us, and Ethan, I want to get a little technical here, bring the show to a grinding nerd halt. Oh, there it is, a book. Yeah, let's bring up Ethan's book. Ben Bernanke's Fed. This was the first good look at the Fed after Alan Greenspan. It's a little dated now, but it's a really good read, particularly for those of you studying monetary economics in school. Ethan, birth, death.
It's perfect for all the nerds out there.
It is. It's a nerd gift for the beach this year. Very good. Nice shameless plug, Ethan. That was good. Birth, death adjustment. Nobody died. What is the birth, death adjustment, and why is it important?
Well, the birth-death adjustment is this idea that we know that in any given month, new companies are formed and other companies go out of business, and they don't show up on these surveys. If the BLS or the Bureau of Labor Statistics don't know you're a company, they can't count your workers. So the Labor Statistics group adjusts the data. They count some extra people in on the assumption that some new companies have been formed, and they take some workers out because of the failure companies. So they're just trying to keep track of this kind of hidden part of the job market.
Is it subject to adjustment? Tyler Durden over at Zero Hedge made a big deal about this today, this idea of this is really inflating non-farm payrolls. Do you buy that, or does the BLS really have a handle on these adjustments over time?
Well, the BLS has been working on this for decades to try and improve the way they do this. So it's not for lack of trying that they estimate these numbers. I don't think we should assume they're wrong. We're in a recovery in the economy. There generally tends to be a lot of new small businesses, even in a weak recovery like this. So a lot of the job growth is not going to actually be counted. It's going to be companies that have just been formed. So I don't have any reason to doubt the statistics. I don't think the job market's even worse than what we're already looking at.
We go beneath the headline data. This is a great chart, folks. This is production workers, weekly hours, a shorter national work week. We've gone from 35, I'm itching myself in the insert there because I got the makeup's killing me. 35 hours down to 33 hours. 35 hours down to 33 hours. Remarkable. Why do we have a shorter work week, Ethan Harris?
It's because there are too many people who don't have the full-time job that they used to have. It's a combination of companies doing a little less overtime and people who just can't get the full-time job they'd like. A lot of people taking two jobs.
Yeah.
It's a sign that we haven't had a full recovery in the labor market, that we're not getting back to normal work hours.
Have we benefited our way to temporary employment? Are benefits too much of the pie now versus salary, so that they're hesitant to go full-time?
Yeah, I think that is true. I think U.S. businesses have decided to be very conservative about full-time hiring. They'd rather use temps, they'd rather use part-time people and not pay these very high benefits. This is one of the side effects of having extremely rapid medical cost inflation in the United States, and it does mean more families that don't have health insurance.
Let's do Paul Krugman right now, if we could. This is great, folks. Ethan Harris way out front on a subpar GDP statistic, echoing somewhat what we've seen for Professor Krugman. The mistake of 2010, the mistake of last year, may yet be followed by an even bigger mistake. Even if that doesn't happen, however, the fact is that policy response has been inadequate. Ethan Harris, his QE1, QE 1.5, QE 2, have they been inadequate?
Well, I mean, I think we have to, if I was at the Fed, I do worry a little bit about pushing too hard on a string or on a policy that doesn't really work that well. So I have some sympathy with the Fed being kind of reluctant to really pull out nuclear weapons here. After all, they've been severely criticized for just doing relatively modest quantitative easing programs. But yeah, I mean, I'm concerned about lack of policy stimulus. I'm actually much more worried about this fiscal tightening going on, that they're going to get ahead of themselves and tighten too soon. I trust the Fed a lot more than I do the rest of Washington.
How much is fiscal drag now? Your team is calculating this for your weekend note for Monday morning. How much as a percent of GDP will fiscal drag be in the next 12 months?
Well, we've gone from an environment where we had a percentage point or more of stimulus going into the economy to one where policy is roughly neutral now, so we've lost that stimulus. Going into next year, even without any new programs, even without any big budget cuts this summer, we're going to have a 1% drag. So we're going to go from +1 to 0 to -1. That's that's the economy. The private sector has to make up for that lack of stimulus.
Yeah, that math, folks, is one of the most important statements we've heard today, or heard this week rather, on radio and TV, going from +1 to 0 to the -1 fiscal drag. Not Portugal, but it gets you there. Earlier this morning on Bloomberg Surveillance Radio, 7 to 10 a.m. What a killer show today. Thank you, David Malpass, as well. Bill Gross was on. I asked him if the news from the jobs report is a one-off, or does he look for a persistency of this tough data?
No, I think there's a persistency here. I think it's back to our old new normal. I think we have 2% real growth in the United States. It's based on high debt and delevering that has been going on for several years now, and it's accompanied, importantly, by structural headwinds in employment, which is related to construction and to finance and to retail, which are certainly less relevant in today's global economy.
Bill Gross of PIMCO, we thank him for his monthly presence on our 8:30 jobs report on Bloomberg Surveillance. Ethan Harris, I want to go to the constraint of constraints. Ken Rogoff said this to me pushing 8 years ago. I'm thinking it's investment in America. Here's a new long-term view, folks. This will become one of our permanent charts here. Growth in investment has disappeared. There is a chart back to 1947 which shows a wonderful slope, semi-log, of investment growth in America. And then, Ethan, it just dies about 10 or 12 years ago. What happened? Where's the investment? Is it abroad?
It is abroad, and it's also misallocation of resources. I mean, the flip side of this housing bubble was that we weren't putting enough of our capital into real capital, that is, into businesses. And so we have some making up to do as a country. We can't rely on the housing market, obviously, as a driver of growth. We need to reverse that investment trend and get back to normal levels of investment.
Wonderful. Ethan Harris, thank you so much. A busy day for you and us as well.